Sing, O Muse, of the 9 daughters of Zeus and Mnemosyne, the 3 Titan muses older than time, the ecstatic frenzy of art and the lives laid down in your service. Sing of their power and significance, that you may be forgotten no more. Art is sacred. The act of creating is the closest humans can ever come to the divine, at least in the view of many poets and artists of all kinds who've experienced the mania of the Muses. Scholars have long dismissed the Muses as minor deities, invoked only in the oldest songs, but they're far from minor. They're deities whose offerings consisted of the actual lives of entire classes of skilled laborers who gave offerings day in and day out in an inspired state that drove many of them mad. They're participants in divine and human justice, healers through song, translators of divine truth through the creative process and prophecy, the goddesses who lend authority to epic through their long memories, and so much more. At their core, they serve as the arbiters of divine truth in human lives. Let's give the Muses their due, first and last. Kairete! In my recent video on the manic blessings of inspiration and prophecy, I explored the concept of mania in ancient Greece as it relates specifically to the Muses and how they interact with poets and artists generally. The information in that video is essential to understanding this one, so if you missed it, I highly suggest checking out the link in the iCard before going through this video. There are strong links between the cults and the mythology surrounding the Muses, Apollon, Pan, Hermes, the nymphs, and Dionysos, and I will be digging deeper into those relationships and their god profile on the whole as well. This video will be divided into 2 parts, and the god profile of the Muses as a whole will also be similarly subdivided, as trying to cover the whole of a deity or set of deities themai is a complex affair, and I don't feel that even in the long form I can address the entire complexity of the Muses and their roles in Greek society and praxis in just one video. These videos will be a bit different than the multi-part series of the past, as they'll essentially be treated as sections of the same video. So in the next video, when I cover healing, prophecy, and music, the sections of that video will be numbered after the ones in this one, so it will start with part 3, part 4, etc. For now, in this video, we'll be talking about the role of the Muses in the divine order of Zeus and their relationships with artists. I'll be going through a number of mythic examples, as well as hymns and prayers throughout both videos to help create a picture of the role the Muses played in the lives of the ancients. As I've laid out in previous videos, such as how to read mythology like in ancient Greek, this isn't due to any kind of mythic literalism, but rather to glean an understanding from language and metaphor and utilize the myths as explanatory tools toward the ancient worldview. In other words, I don't think the things in these myths actually literally happened, but I do think the explanations provided can be useful when exploring the nature of the gods, as they were clearly divinely inspired and contain truths about them. With that out of the way, let's get into it. Part 1. The nature of the Muses and art. Who are the Muses? Goddesses of art and creativity may be your first thought, goddesses of madness and inspiration if you're a bit more familiar with Greek mythology and thought generally. Poets from the Renaissance and later have referred to them or to a personalized idea of them, as have artists of all kinds. But their invocations, though sometimes containing the essence of the Greek idea, still capture the barest glimpse of these incredible, multifaceted beings. So let's look a bit deeper, shall we? One of the first bits of surviving evidence that we can examine to determine the nature of deities considered pan-Hellenic, or worshipped across the majority of Greek city-states, are the epics, especially those we have surviving from Homer and Hesiod. Most folks believe that there are 9 muses, the 9 daughters of Zeus and Mnemosyne. Erato, of erotic poetry and mime, Calliope, of epic poetry, Cleo, of history, Euterpe, of flute music and lyric poetry, Thalia, of comedy and bucolic poetry, Melpomene, of tragedy, Terpiscore, of dance and choral song, Polyamnia, of sacred hymns, and Urania, of astronomy and astrology. These specific attributes weren't assigned to the Muses individually in writing until the classical era and later, or at the very least we don't have any writings surviving of that sort until the classical era. Homer only ever names the Muses as a collective, and Hesiod names them individually without assigning them specific roles, but does specify that Calliope is lovely and chief among them, which is fitting fitting for a lyric poet's personal practice. There's a good chance that they may have had specific associations that neither of the oldest poets felt the need to specify, as they assumed their audience had at least a passing familiarity with the deities about which they sung. Mnemosyne herself was one of the 3 Mnemosyne Titanides, the 3 Titan muses that I referred to in the opening invocation of this video. Mnemosyne, whose name means memory, Iode, whose name means song, and Melete, whose name means practice. These 3 muses, according to a fragment from a lesser-known epic poet Mimneros, dating back to the 7th century BCE, were the daughters of Gaia and Oranos. That these Mnemosyne are considered the oldest by some lyric poets is likely no accident. If you think about it, practice, song, and memory would be essential to the art of the lyric poet in ancient times. The epics were not quiet compositions to be read and contemplated, but were instead performed in a bardic dialect aloud, accompanied by music, typically that of the lyre. The musical notes served as both a form of praise in addition to the invocation of the muses first and last, and as devices to jog the memory of the performer, as there are numerous links to music and memory that scientists have found in the last half-century. Homer invokes the Mnemosyne 5 times throughout the Iliad, but only once at the beginning of the Odyssey. The first is at the opening, similar to Hesiod in his Theogony, though without the personal description of how he came to learn the composition of verse from her. The wrath-sing goddess of Peleus' son Achilles, that destructive wrath which brought countless woes to the Achaeans, and sent forth to Hades many valiant souls of heroes, and made them themselves spoiled for dogs and every bird. Thus the plan of Zeus came to fulfillment from the time where they first parted in strife, Atreus' son, king of men, and brilliant Achilles. Who then of the gods was it that brought these 2 parts together to contend? This invocation invites the muses to participate with Homer, or the poet performing his composition, to ensure the accuracy of the account, and also ensure that the poet should deviate toward local traditions in free verse. The truth of the story would still be preserved if he did. The goddess's voice serves as the arbiter of truth here, and lends authority to the narrative as well as potentially inspiring the performance to greatness. The invocation at the beginning of the Odyssey is similar. Tell me, O Muse, of the man of many devices who wandered full many ways after he had sacked the sacred citadel of Troy. Many were the men whose cities he saw and whose mind he learned. Aye, and many of the woes where he suffered in his heart upon the sea, seeking to win his own life, the return of his comrades. Yet even so he saved not his comrades, though he desired it sore. For through their own blind folly they perished, fools who devoured the kine of Helios Hyperion. But he took from them the day of their returning. Of these things, goddess, daughter of Zeus, beginning where thou wilt, tell thou even unto us. This invokes the authority and memory of the goddesses, and is the only reference to the muses in the whole of the Odyssey. It sets up the idea of the poet as directly channeling the story from the Mnemosyne. The performance and composition is not his own. He is a mere conduit to the will and wiles of the goddesses. The idea of the Mnemosyne's memory being authoritative is echoed throughout the Iliad as well. In Book 2, 484 through 492, Homer calls out, Tell me now, ye muses that have dwellings on Olympos, for ye are goddesses at hand and know all things, where we hear all but a rumor and know all nothing. Who were the captains of the Danaans and their lords? But the common folk I could not tell nor name, nay, not through 10 tongues were mine, and 10 mouths and a voice unwearying, through the heart within me were bronze. Did not the muses of Olympus, daughters of Zeus that beareth the aegis, call to my mind all of them beneath Ilios? This theme, being the daughters of memory and the preservers of truth in these oral histories, again comes up when in books 11, 14, and 16, he again calls on the muses to verify the facts of the tale as he tells it. Almost the way many of us would turn to a friend who is also present at an event we ourselves are telling others about in a group, to ensure the recollection was accurate. The Mnemosyne are present at every poetic performance, the keepers of the collective memories of the Greeks, and those who know the truth of the tales themselves. These invocations hint at an intimate relationship between the muses and the performer. Where the typical offerings given by most worshippers to their gods were physical, in the form of burned offerings of vegetal or animal origin, the poets were said to offer smokeless or devotional offerings. The performance itself served as the perpetual offering to the muses. The devotions of the poet's very life became the altar upon which the time and energy of the poet were metaphorically burned. And the muses served Hestia's role as the conduit to the gods, whose other hymns, praises, and replests were sung for. The poets lived with the muses, perpetually dancing on the edge of their minds, edging them ever toward madness, ensuring their performances, at least, remained sane and accurate. We see the same intimacy and distance interplay in Theogony, Hesiod's epic genealogy of the gods. He invokes the 9 daughters of Zeus and Mnemosyne twice, in 2 very different contexts. In the first, he talks about their wild dancing atop Mount Helicon, and describes both their teaching of music and how they breathed the gift of song into him. They also say something curious, calling human shepherds mere bellies, and that we know how to speak many false things as though they were true, but we know when we will to utter true things. This makes them sound duplicitous, dangerous, deceptive, and wild, like the nymphs described later in the poem, but also close, personal, intimate, like the confirmational invocations throughout the Iliad. But then, further down in lines 63 through 103, he describes the Muses as the daughters of Zeus, entertaining the gods, giving them the epithet Olympian, which he also only gives to Zeus otherwise. These Muses almost seem to be the polar opposite of the wild, dancing, dangerous, and angry Messiah of Helicon. They gift princes and politicians with persuasive speech and the ability to settle crimes and disputes with justice, and gift singers and poets with the ability to heal the woes of depressed folks with their songs. These Muses are orderly, not dangerous, of Olympus and the court of Zeus, not the wild places of the mountains and caves. Some scholars have speculated that this is a representation of two differing beliefs Hesiod holds clashing in the verse: the local nymph-like cult of the Mnemosyne in his native Helicon, and the pan-Hellenic view that he's trying to give the Muses in the poem. Some have even speculated that because Homer also invokes a muse, that these might even be two varying beliefs on two sets of goddesses, but I disagree with both of these views and would like to offer an alternative explanation. The Olympian Mnemosyne are the same goddesses as the Heliconian in Theogony, but the former are intimate, personal, Manic, while the latter are tame, distant, inspired, but subdued. Being the daughters of Mnemosyne, who is praised for bringing logos, or logic, into the world, we can see the Muses at their core are goddesses that enable us to comprehend the ineffable through art, a process liable to drive the channeler mad. But those who consume that inspired art, through the offering of the sanity and longevity of the artist, benefit from the new understanding their sacrifice gave to their community. They are goddesses of order through madness, civility brought about from wildness. This backs with Mnemosyne's role in the Trophonium, as I mentioned back in my video on Mania, and we'll get into more in the second video of this series, as Pausanias says that the querent is, quote, crazed and ignorant of himself and those near him when he first sits on the throne of Mnemosyne, but once they do, they can recount their experiences and come back into their mind. Mnemosyne, memory, is the mother of order and logos. Without memory, there can be no reference for logic, no good nous for the phrenes to order the world. Without memory and practice, there is no art. Songs can technically exist independent of these, but not the meeting of human and divine that is music or poetry. These are special products of a divine madness or inspiration in human craft, originally gifted by the goddesses. In fact, in Theogony, music as a concept didn't even exist until after Typhon was dispatched by Zeus, as the Muses weren't said to be born until after this event, and the Timai, or honors, of the gods were distributed. Typhon's description begins with his many heads and the cacophony of sounds they emit. From his shoulders grew 100 heads of a snake, fearful dragon, with dark, flickering tongues. And from under the brows of his eyes in his marvelous heads flashed fire, and fire burned from his heads as he glared. And there were voices in all his dreadful heads which uttered every kind of sound unspeakable. For at one time they made sounds such as the gods understood, but at another, the noise of a bull bellowing aloud in proud, ungovernable fury, and at another, the sound of a lion, relentless at heart, and at another, sounds like whelps, wonderful to hear, and again at another he would hiss, so that the high mountains re-echoed. And truly a thing past help would have happened on that day, and he would have come to reign over mortals and immortals, had not the father of men and gods seemed quick to perceive it. This mix of sounds hints toward the disorder that Typhon represents. As I mentioned in my video, Is Zeus a Predator?, Theogony can largely be described as an epic recitation of the divine ordering of the universe, in which deities that began with the literal earth and sky, Gaia and Ouranos, both abstract further as they reproduce from directly being the things they're concerned with, but also get closer to human concerns and individuality. Gaia and Ouranos are wild and vengeful. She extracts her revenge directly on Ouranos for the pain of sealing her womb by giving her son Kronos a weapon to literally, dismember him. Where Ouranos sealed Gaia's womb directly and stopped his children from being born at all, his son Kronos takes a different, slightly less but still violent and direct approach, consuming his children as they're born so none can succeed him. Rhea's revenge abstracts this idea further. She doesn't directly arm Zeus, but she does lie to Kronos to protect him. Zeus's trickery that later allows him to free his siblings takes the form of a sort of tricky or negative reciprocity. He makes his father ill, and frees his siblings in this way through a clever gift. The war that that happens afterwards shows how his leadership differs from that of his father. His father wanted no competition and sealed everyone but his wife, whereas following both the Titanomachy and the Tephanomachy, Zeus distributes the honors or timai of the world, as it were, among the gods individually. Where Gaia is the literal earth itself, Demeter has the timai of agriculture, rulership of shoots and leaves and first fruits, roles in motherhood and the reproduction of animals, and so much more. But Athena too participates in her domains through the invention of the plow, for invention and innovation are within her timai. This interconnectedness of the gods through reciprocal honors, coupled with the transference of the cycles of succession from the gods to man through the gift of Pandora, mortality and reproduction, ensures that the order of Zeus will be stabilized. These ideas of reciprocity are core to all of Hellenism, and require the timai of the gods to remain order as it is. Which brings us back to Typhon and his chaotic sounds and the disorder of his very presence within Theogony, why these timai aren't distributed until he's dispatched. The chaotic voices of Typhon showcases the multiplicity of him, being a titan produced by Gaia when she made love to Tartaros under the assistance of Aphrodite, who herself was born directly from the act of castration in Theogony. Typhon was said to have made a cacophony of sounds all at once from his many heads, including the divine voice of the gods, or Ossa, associated in the first mention of the Mnemosyne with them specifically. When you look closely at Theogony, Ossa is only ever mentioned as the voices of the gods, especially the Muses, and of Typhon, and the clap of Zeus's thunderbolt. Another word, ops, is used only for the singing voices of the gods, and the word aude is used to denote the voices of both gods and mankind. He's also first described through his heads, then dark serpents with flickering tongues, but if you examine closely the sounds he is said to make, only one, Ossa, is said to be communicative in any way. All the other sounds form an ineffable cacophony, awesome though it is, also terrifying and incomprehensible. And these sounds echo in line 835, just as the Muses' voices echo through Olympus in the halls of their father in 40 through 43. The verb for echo, ekeo, is only used in these two places in the entire poem, further strengthening the connection. The focus on the myriad of sounds, none of which offer communication but still overwhelm the senses, mirrors and twists the description of the sweet dew placed on the tongues of princes in the second passage of the Olympian Muses, where Typhon's sounds defy the very concept of communications. The Muses facilitate it. This is echoed further by the way Hesiod discusses his own initiation as a poet. When he refers to the breathing of the divine voice into him by the Muses, he uses the term aude, where otherwise it was Ossa, the awesome voice of the gods. This allows him to create the kleos, or account or epic poem in celebration of the gods. There's no accident that the section bridging the two descriptions is the pedigree and descent of the Muses themselves. It's clear there's a connection between the wild Mnemosyne of Helicon and the tame Mnemosyne of Olympus, that they are two halves of the same whole. They are said to be of one mind despite having individual names and aspects in line 60 of this section, further unifying them as a voice of order contrasted to the disorder of Typhon. When the goddesses send forth their divine voice, art is the result. When Typhon speaks, the state of awe results, but no communication or account. No kleos exists. Hesiod clearly saw the Muses as participants in every stage of creation, enforcing the divine order of their father through these acts. The goddesses first grant the mnemonic inspiration, then pull back and allow the craft, as personified through the three Titan Muses, and Hesiod having been taught the art of lyric poetry prior to divine inspiration, to create order through the poet's service. These last 2 points, that the bards and poets are servants of the Mnemosyne and creators of order, are backed by the Homeric hymn to Selene, which calls the poets servants of the Muses, and Theogony, where the stress placed on how they help Zeus enact his will in the world through the blessings on the princes, makes their role in the justice of their father clear. When the poet later performs and they're invoked first and last, they provide the conduit to deliver the offering to the gods and to allow the listeners the understanding without the severity of the frenzy through audience enthusiasmos. See my video on Mania for references on where that conclusion comes from. Ancient and modern artists have had similar experiences filtered through different cultural paradigms, but still described in many of the same ways. And the seemingly paradoxical present of the artist and their style in divinely inspired art makes sense even in the presence of divine mania or inspiration. Because of course, the second half of the process I outlined in the ordering of madness is going to come from the perspective of the orderer. That's the nature of order. The way I arrange my bookshelf is going to likely look slightly different from how you do, because what my life experience has caused me to value an organization is going to naturally differ unless we've had similar or identical experiences. Divine inspiration doesn't exclude the artist. The artist is a tool themselves. Their perspective is essential, because that's why they were given that specific truth to render, through their perspective, their memory. As Plato said, their good nous must first be removed to experience the divine revelation, but the ordering, as Horace points out, requires practice and craft. The agony, practice, craft, and toil, and the ecstasy, the inspiration, addiction, mania, the wellspring that artists return to, comprise together the act of creation. Returning to the example of Typhon from earlier, his defeat at the hands of Zeus is discussed in language that mirrors human acts of creation and crafting. As the fire poured forth from Typhon when he was hit by the lightning bolt, struck in the dark and rugged glens of the mountain, and the monstrous earth was burned widely by the wondrous breath of fire, and just as where tin is melted, heated in perforated crucibles through the techne of laborers, or just as iron, which is the strongest of all when it is subjected to the blazing fire in the glens of the mountain, is melted in the good earth by the hands of Hephaestus, just so, then, the earth was melted by the blaze of burning fire. Gaia, who birthed Typhon and Typhon, are reordered by Zeus into physical existences, earth and fire, and the humans and the Theoi can use them for their benefit. The word for craft here, techne, was only used for trickery prior to this in theogony, that of Kronos by Zeus and Zeus by Prometheus, but it's used here specifically in its much later connotation as craft itself. Techne is used as a tool in service of Zeus to bring order to mankind. Typhon meets his end as a chaotic deity, and his only remaining influences are as a source of fire for Hephaestus' fords and the fell winds that destroy unwitting seafarers when they venture too far out or at the wrong time. When his chaotic voices are quieted, we're left only with the orderly voices of the Muses, through the chaotic process of artistic birth, the madness that is translated to order and truth through the divine act of creating under their guidance. The gift of the goddesses, through their mother memory, is the ability to translate the ossa of the gods into the aude of mortals. The Mnemosyne embody the entire process of creating art and are involved with the whole process. They select the artists, remove their nous, replace it, and encourage them as they repersonalize, contextualize, and translate the truth of the Muses into the lies of fiction and poetry that still convey truth. Good fiction or poetry is a lie that teaches truth. The story didn't literally happen, but it feels like it did, because of the truth in it. Hence the declaration of the Mnemosyne at the beginning of Theogony. All of the greatest poetry, music, and fictive prose creates a lie so convincing that the truth meant to be taught by it shines brighter than the stars in the minds of the audience. Art changes people from the inside out, and the best art offers layers, so that every return to said work brings a new insight or understanding. I know I've drawn from the epics over and over again, finding more and more as my understanding of classical and archaic society and culture has grown over the years, and as my own goddess with the gods has informed my beliefs and understanding. So then, the role of Mnemosyne doesn't begin or end at inspiration, but instead could be argued to extend over the whole life of an artist, from their training and study in their younger years to the crafting of their greatest works later in life, from the tutelage and influence of the Titan Mnemosyne to the specialization under the guidance of the muse patron of their art. The offerings to the Mnemosyne are ever smokeless, consisting of the very act of creation and performance itself. The life of the artist belongs to the Muses. But as we'll see over the course of this god profile, the Muses touch the lives of far more than just artists and those who consumed their art. Not that the effects of art on human life should ever be minimized. Story shapes lives, after all. But they were called upon for far more than just inspiration and creativity. In fact, we've already touched a bit on another aspect of Greek life where they were thought to play a major role: the justice of their father. Part 2. Justice, History, and the Many Lenses of Truth. These things, then, the Muses sang who dwell on Olympos, 9 daughters begotten by a great Zeus, Cleo and Euterpe, Thalia, Melpomene and Terpsichore, and Erato and Polyymnia and Urania, and Cleope, who is chiefest of them all, for she attends on worshipful princes. Whomever of the heaven-nourished princes are the daughters of great Zeus, honor and behold at his birth. They pour sweet dew upon his tongue, and from his lips flow gracious words. All the people who looks toward him while he settles the causes with true judgment, and he, speaking surely, would soon make wise end even of a great quarrel. For therefore are the princes wise in heart, because when the people are being misguided in their assembly, they set right the matter again with ease, persuading them with gentle words. And when he passes through a gathering, they greet him as a god with gentle reverence. and he is conspicuous among the assembled. Such is the holy gift of Muses to men. As I mentioned in the previous section, this reference to the Muses makes it clear that Hesiod sees their role in the justice of their father as one of facilitation of communication, in much the same way as their divine song stands in opposition to the frightful, chaotic noise of Typhus. It may feel strange when paired with the rest of his praise of them regarding art and the unique relationship between artists and the Muses, but as we'll see, this is far from the case. This passage from Hesiod isn't an accident, nor does it seem that this idea was unique to him or to theogony. Aristotle, in his Problemata, proposed that the word nomos, which means law, and the corresponding genre of music by the same name, may be related because in the pre-literate days of Greece, laws were put to music so princes and citizens would not forget them. There's a clear connection between this idea and the blessing of the Muses upon the princes, with their words being honeyed as the words of the poets who sang were also said to be. We also have invocations to the Muses related to justice in both surviving written prayers and directly the works that they inspired, such as Euripides' tragedy, The Trojan Women. Sing me, Muse, a tale of Troy, a funeral dirge in strains unheard as yet with tears, for now I will uplift for Troy a piteous chant, telling how I met my doom and fell a wretched captive to the Argives by reason of a four-footed beast that moves on wheels. When Achaea's sons left at our gate that horse loud rumbling to the sky with its trappings of gold and its freight of warriors, and our people cried out as they stood upon the rocky citadel, "Up now, you whose toil is over, and drag the sacred image to the shrine of the Zeus-born maiden, goddess of our Ilium." Forth from his house came every youth and every grey head too, and with songs of joy they took the fatal snare within, cries the chorus in the ill-fated play, in seeming inversion of the invocations we've seen in Theogony and at the beginning of many of the Homeric hymns. In these traditional invocations, the voices of the Mnemosyne are called upon to validate the accuracy, truthfulness, and passion of the performer and performance. They're used as an authority. It came from the Muses, therefore it must contain truth, for the Mnemosyne remember all and can recall it with perfect accuracy, where the minds of men are fallible and liable to forget. This is particularly evident in the Muse invocation in the Iliad 485 through 491, which we talked about earlier, when Homer calls to the Muses to aid in his recounting of ships, their captains, and their crews. He outright states that mortals tend to only remember significant names, but the goddesses remember all, and remember them accurately. Where Homer requests, the chorus, following Hecuba's account in the tragedy, demands. Dana Montano, in her paper on the invocation, points out that where a male bard's voice is being validated by the feminine voice of the Mnemosyne in a typical epic invocation, the feminine chorus is instead demanding the Muses validate their suffering using their divine voices, that they not be forgotten. Specifically, they demand the Muses sing with tears, which is a continuation of a trope in Greek tragedy where a personified muse character is shown to display human emotions, which theologically they'd naturally need to understand in order to participate in the creative process and have their divinely inspired work be as impactful as it needs to be. This display of emotion in response to muse interference isn't completely alien to the epic, though. In the Odyssey, twice characters respond to the same outburst of emotion when another sings with the inspiration of the Muses. First in Book 1, when Penelope responds in tears to Phemius, and later in Book 8 when Odysseus cries after Demodocus sings about the fall of Troy. In this case, the tears of the Mnemosyne are contemporary to the time they are being invoked and not necessarily a result of their inspiration. The chorus of Trojan women is demanding that they be made famous and remembered for their suffering, for the horrors of war, the dark, uglier side of the epic celebration of Homeric deeds. Where the men of the epics are remembered for their conquest and glory, the women of Troy in the play are remembered for the exact inverse, their terrible suffering, which brought that glory to bear, their widowing and consequent forced marriages, which are compared to enslavement in later passages, to Athenians they've never met. In another of Euripides' plays, Rhesus, which we'll talk about in more detail in the second video in this series, a muse character herself laments the tragedy of war when her son, for whom the play is named, is killed by Odysseus and company instead of Hector. Despite knowing the truth and order of things, this muse cannot stop this injustice from occurring, but in her lament, mentions her role in composing a funerary dirge and preventing the death of her son by calling a favor from Persephone, whom she claims owes her a favor due to her alliance with Orpheus. Both of these plays examine events from the Iliad through another lens, that of the women left behind by the deaths celebrated in the epic so very briefly. K.A. Welsh once wrote a detailed paper on the relationship between history and storytelling, beyond even the realm of so-called narrative history, but it seems the Greeks understood this innate relationship well. Cleo, the muse of history, spoke with the same voice as any and all of the other muses, but which voice was heard the loudest depended on the predilections of vocation of the artist listening for their call. The tragedians often explored the darker side of epic history, seeking catharsis, the relief of the audience through the extraordinary feats of empathy possible while enthralled by the enthusiasmos of the Mnemosyne, enraptured with inspired performance. Even the conservative and cranky Plato recognized the power of the Mnemosyne and their servants over the minds and hearts of the populace. We'll get more into his commentary on their influences in the second video in this series, but for now, let's take a look at one of the passages that, frankly, makes me want to punch my screen. It's from the Republic, but also proves my point. Then Glaucon, said I, when you meet economists of Homer who tell us that this poet has been the educator of Hellas, and that for conduct and refinement of human life he is worthy of our study and devotion, and that we should order our entire lives by the guidance of this poet, we must love and salute them as doing the best we can, and concede to them that Homer is the most poetic of poets and the first of tragedians, but we must know the truth, that we can admit no poetry into our city save only hymns to the gods and the praises of good men. For if you grant admission to the honeyed muse in lyric or epic, pleasure and pain will be the lords of your city, instead of law, and that which should arise from time to time have approved itself to the general reason as the best. Did a poet run off with the love of your life or something, Plato? First off, Homer and Hesiod actually can educate the heck out of people as to the nature of the gods in the ancient Greek theological worldview. Plato can get the fuck over himself. Second, Plato is actually paying homage here to the immense powers of the goddesses to inspire and move the populace through poetic works. By acknowledging the importance and power of the enthusiasmos of the Mnemosyne and seeking to ban it because of it, he's recognizing the role these goddesses play in civil order. He expands on this later when discussing the role of music in Greek society in both Laws and the Republic, and as I said, we'll get into that later, trust me. Music and poetry played massive roles not only in the festivals of the Greeks, but nearly every aspect of Greek life, and we're going to discuss that in depth in the future video. Okay, you might be thinking, we've got all these bits from a number of different authors that seem to add up to a role in justice, but apart from Hesiod, where is a direct invocation of the goddesses in this role? Ladies, gents, and non-binary friends, I present to you the Prayer of Solon to the Muses. Now, I'm gonna read the whole thing, and it is a bit long, but trust me, it's worth it to get through it all and break it down. Splendid children of memory and Olympian Zeus, give ear, Pierian muses, unto my prayer. Grant me prosperity at the hands of the blessed gods, and good fame ever at the hands of men. Make me, I pray you, sweet to my friends and sour unto my foes. To these a man reverend to behold, those a man terrible. Wealth I desire to possess, but I would not have it unrighteously. Retribution cometh always afterward. The riches that be given of the gods come to a man for last, from the bottom even to the top, whereas they be sought by wanton violence come not orderly, but persuaded against their will by unrighteous works, and quickly is ruin mingled among them, whose beginning is with a little thing as of fire, slight at the first, but in the end a mischief. For the works of man's wanton violence endure not for long, but Zeus serveth at the end of every matter, and suddenly, even as the clouds in spring are quickly scattered by a wind that stirreth the depths of the billowy unharvest sea, layeth waste the fair fields over the wheat-bearing land, reaching even into the high heaven where the gods sit, maketh the sky clear again to view, till the strength of the sun shineth fair over the fat land, and no cloud is to be seen any more. Even such is the vengeance of Zeus. He is not quick to wrath like us over each and every thing, yet of him that hath a wicked heart is he aware and always unceasing. And such a one surely cometh out in plain at least. Aye, one payeth today, another tomorrow, and those who themselves flee and escape the pursuing destiny of heaven, to them vengeance cometh always again, for the price of their deeds is paid by their innocent children, or else by their seed after them. We mortal men alike, good and bad, are minded thus. Each of us keepeth the opinion he had ever till he suffer ill, and then forthwith he grieveth. Albeit ere that we rejoice open-mouthed in vain expectations, and whoever shall be oppressed with sorest disease bethinketh himself to be whole, and another that is a coward think he be a brave man, or that he hath no comeliness seem to himself goodly to look upon. And if one be needy, constrained by the works of penury, he reckon a way to win much wealth. Each hath his own quest, for one to bring home gain, range the fishy deep a shipboard, tossed by grievous wind, sparing his life no whit. Another serve them whose business lieth with curved plowshare, ploughing the well-planted land, hand for them throughout the year. Another get his living by the skill of his hands and the works of Athena and the master of many crafts. Hephaestus, another through his learning and the gifts of Olympian Musai, cunning in the measures of lovely art, and others again as physicians, having the task of the master of medicines, the healer. For these men there's no end to their labors, for often cometh breath pain little, and a man cannot assuage it by soothing medicines, albeit at other times, him that is confounded by evil and grievous maladies, make quickly the whole by laying on the hands, and another, the far-shooting Lord Apollo, maketh a seer, and the mischief that cometh from a man from afar is known to him that hath the gods with him, for no augury nor offering will ever ward off what is destined to be. Aye, surely fate it is that bringeth mankind both good and ill, and the gifts of the immortal gods offer must needs be accepted. Surely, too, there's danger in every sort of business, nor know we at the beginning of a matter how it is to end. Nay, sometimes he that striveth to do a good thing falleth unawares into great ruin and sore. Whereas God's giveth good help in all things to one that doeth ill, be his deliverance from folly. And as for wealth, there is no set end clearly down. For such as have today the greatest riches among us, these have twice the eagerness that others have, and who can satisfy all? 'Tis sure the gods give us men possessions, yet a ruin is revealed thereout. With one hand hath now, and another then, whensoever Zeus sendeth it in retribution. Yeah, that was a lot, and also a very complicated translation, but let's break that down a bit. Some scholars have tried to argue that the opening invocation to the Muses is unrelated to the rest of the prayer, or merely mirrors the poetic invocation of the epic poets, but both I and the scholar Archibald Allen disagree. What follows is a treatise on justice, injustice, and how it all relates to the accumulation of wealth, which, even to this day, is symbolic of power and social influence. Many of the ancients, including Hesiod in Works and Days, agree with Solon here that wealth is an essential component of success in ancient times. It was often seen as a sign the gods favored someone, though not always, and very much was thought of as necessary for comfort by the aristocratic class who left behind most of our writings. Solon begins with the invocation to the Mnemosyne not to inspire his words, but for fame as well as fortune. This, of course, references the long memory of the Muses and how their songs preserve the names of important people, but it continues from there. He describes in depth how humans, as mere mortals and not immortal gods, often have a disported view of ourselves, and how the material blessings of the gods can't always be a correction to that viewpoint, as Zeus is slow to anger, but will eventually rectify injustice, even if it has to happen in the lifetime of a descendant rather than the person themselves. His first line following the clear invocation to the Muses is that he wants wealth, but not unrighteously. And his explanation follows that men can be too easily persuaded that what is, in fact, not righteous is actually not only okay, but is receiving encouragement from the gods. When describing how this rectification of injustice occurs, Solon gives us 3 examples, all the same process but through different lenses. The first section isn't a metaphor, but direct. When men are persuaded by unjust works to continue them in order to accumulate wealth, justice creeps up on them until suddenly it levels their wealth to the ground and redistributes it. The second is a metaphor, a storm that comes at the end of winter, because Zeus is slow to anger and doesn't look at any individual act, but instead the total accumulation of them. And the last is the direct actions of Zeus himself, which may even be carried down family lines, which of course the Muses would remember. Humans have a tendency to be somewhat positive in our outlook, until suffering hits our shores, he tells us. And even then we have difficulty imagining our own oblivion. Solon reminds the Muses that humans who are sick think they'll get better, those who are poor one day believe that they won't be so, and the cowardly think they are brave. Mortal men, he tells us, have a distorted view of themselves because of their lack of insight into the whole of the fates, their lack of perspective. Humans only have our own viewpoints to draw on, our own experiences. The Muses, Zeus, and the Fates, on the other hand, can see everything. This also leads to humans misinterpreting the actions of the gods. Sometimes the gods take a liking to people and protect them from themselves, and sometimes the gods punish people who are doing well because their ancestors committed crimes, or because their suffering is in some way necessary for something else. We can't know the will of the gods at any given instant because we don't have their discernment, but what Solon is asking the Muses for specifically here is as much discernment as a human can possess. Let me come into fame and infamy through good, virtuous acts, he pleads to them, and help me see the truth of things, rather than being deceived by my mortal limitations. The Muses here are goddesses of wisdom and discernment, of truth as it is, and not the malleable truth of human doxa, or opinion. As goddesses who carry the memory of mankind, they allow us to translate those experiences through story and art. They naturally would see all for what it is, much like the Fates, and through their participation in their father's justice, would also have the ability to grant the discernment about the truth of things, as well as create beautiful beautiful lies to teach that truth. This also appears to be a major factor in how the healing of the Muses is said to work. We'll get into that more in the next video on the series. For now, I hope that what I've discussed here can help us all gain a deeper appreciation of the incredible complexity of these magnificent and far from minor goddesses. I'd like to give a quick shout out to my friends Beafeld of Wind of the World Tree and Be the Hellenist Witch for letting me yell in their directions at random over the past 3 weeks as I've worked on this project. Bee in particular is helping with the research side on the music side of things for the next video and was key to finding several passages and concepts we'll be exploring in the next part of this series. I couldn't ask for better friends in the community. Thank the rest of you also for sticking through that. If you're new here, reveal a maddening truth to the subscribe button and ensure justice is done for the likes transgressions. Drop down into the comments and let me know about your relationship to the Muses. What you knew and what you didn't, and what you're looking forward to in part 2. For once, I do plan on releasing the parts back to back, so you won't have to wait for too long. Special thanks also to my patrons. You've all patiently let me blow up the patron chat with my nonsense and research, with my excessive excitement that has driven mad many a friend to the extreme frustration. You all encouraged me to follow the muse, as it were, and complete this god profile, and gave me feedback when my insecurities told me no one cared about the deeper dives I've been doing since the start of the year. I've got so many exciting things coming, and it's only through your support that it's possible to bring them into the world. May the cycle of reciprocity between us ever remain positive. And remember, we're stronger together.